Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're really going to get into a topic everyone's got an opinion on.
Oh, I suspect you might be right.
Lockdowns. Did they work? Did they not? We've got research, expert opinions. We'll even touch on the whole social media circus surrounding it.
It's going to be interesting to see how all of the different pieces of the lockdown puzzle fit together.
Should be quite the deep dive, so buckle up. Let's start with something that seems obvious. Less movement, fewer chances for the virus to spread, right?
Right.
So you'd think lockdowns would equal fewer cases? That's kind of the whole point?
Logically, yes.
But then we've got this Google mobility data. You familiar with this?
I am. It's fascinating how they track those movement trends using smartphone location data.
Right. All anonymized, but it gives a pretty clear picture of, well, how much people are moving around.
And you'd assume that in places with strict lockdowns, that movement would plummet.
Exactly. But, and this is the head scratcher, the data, it didn't line up neatly with infection rates.
It's true. And this isn't about being pro or anti-lockdown.
Right.
What it tells us is that the pandemic was way more complex than just stay home and the virus goes away.
Right. It was never going to be that simple. Makes you question, like, what other factors were playing into it all.
Absolutely.
And this whole idea of how our understanding of the pandemic changed over time, there is this one story. An advisor at the University of Minnesota, I think it was, early on, super pro-lockdown, like even stricter than what we had.
Yeah, I remember that. They were advocating for some pretty intense measures.
Exactly. Then, fast forward a year, and they do a complete 180, publicly saying lockdowns aren't necessary anymore.
Which, sparked a lot of debate. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? Science is all about constantly reevaluating what we think we know based on new evidence.
It's like that saying, strong opinions, loosely held, right? You have to be open to changing your mind when new information comes to light.
Precisely. Clinging to outdated beliefs, especially in the face of new data, that's not scientific, and it can be detrimental.
For sure. And this whole idea of different approaches, I mean, we saw that play out globally. Iceland versus Sweden, total opposites, right?
Right. Iceland, being an island nation, had a unique advantage from the start.
Yeah, way easier to control borders and all that.
Exactly, and they used that to their advantage. They were one of the first to implement widespread testing and contact tracing. They even did a study on school reopenings early on.
What'd they find? I never actually read that one.
It suggested that reopening schools was less risky than initially thought, at least in their context, with their precautions.
Huh. And then there's Sweden, basically the poster child for the let it rip approach.
Well, not entirely let it rip. They did implement some restrictions, but they largely kept schools open throughout the pandemic, which, surprisingly to some, resulted in relatively positive health outcomes for teachers. Better than a lot of other professions, actually.
See, this is what I mean about it being complicated. Totally different approaches, and it's still so hard to say definitively what worked better.
Precisely. And that's an important point to keep in mind. There are so many variables at play.
Exactly. Every country, every community even, is different. What works in one place might be a disaster in another.
And this is where I think the role of social media really comes in.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Because instead of nuanced discussions about those complexities we were just talking about, you get these echo chambers.
Where everyone's just amplifying their own side, and any dissenting opinion is like blasphemy.
Right. It's very easy to get caught up in that and start thinking your way is the only way.
And that's dangerous, right? Because we've seen with the data, with the different approaches countries took, this wasn't a simple issue. Black and white, there were and are a lot of gray areas.
Absolutely. This deep dive wasn't about telling anyone what to think about lockdowns, but to get people thinking critically about the information that's out there.
Question everything. Or, well, maybe not everything, but definitely do your research, look at different sources.
And be open to changing your mind.
Exactly. So as we wrap up here, one final thought for everyone. Given everything we've learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, how do we think this changes our response to future public health crises? Something to ponder, right?
Definitely. A lot to think about.
As always, thanks for joining us for the deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.